For years, my life was built on the foundation of trust. My wife, Celia, and I had been married for over 2 decades, raising 2 wonderful kids and creating a life I thought was full of love and partnership. We had our share of challenges, like any couple, but nothing that felt insurmountable. I was proud of us, proud of her. Celia was warm, intelligent, and someone I believed was as committed to our family as I was. But as the years passed, a subtle shift began to creep into our marriage. It wasn't something I could easily pinpoint. At first, it was small things. Her becoming more guarded with her phone, laughing at texts she wouldn't share, or her sudden interest in going out with her friends more frequently. I brushed it off, thinking maybe she just needed her own space. Everyone deserved that, right? It was one of her closest friends, Nina, who eventually shattered my carefully constructed world. Nina and Celia had been inseparable for as long as I could remember. She'd come over for dinners, holidays, and even watched our kids when they were younger. I had no reason to distrust her, until one fateful day, when Nina called me out of the blue. Her voice was shaky, the kind of tone you take when you're about to say something you know will destroy someone. "I'm so sorry to be the one to tell you this," she began, "but I can't keep quiet any longer. Celia has been having an affair for years." The air left my lungs like a punch to the gut. "What are you talking about?" I demanded, my voice trembling with disbelief. "That's not possible." "I didn't want to believe it either," Nina admitted. "But it's true. I've known for a while, and I should have said something sooner. She's been with someone else for the past 20 years. 20 years. The words echoed in my head like a cruel joke. How could she? We'd been married for 23 years. This wasn't just a fling. It was a betrayal of the entire life we'd built together. The days following Nina's revelation were a blur. I vacillated between disbelief, rage, and a deep, gnawing sorrow. 20 years of lies. 20 years of stolen moments, of laughter, of plans made for a future that suddenly felt meaningless. How could Celia have done this? And for so long? At first, I didn't confront her. I couldn't. My mind raced with memories of our life together, every moment now tainted with doubt. Had she been lying all along? Was I just too blind, or too trusting, to see it? I started watching her more closely. The way she carried herself, the late-night work calls, her frequent dinners with friends. I replayed conversations in my head, searching for clues I'd missed. And I kept hearing Nina's voice, "I'm so sorry, but you need to know the truth." One evening, as Celia sat on the couch scrolling through her phone, I decided to test the waters. "Hey," I said, keeping my tone casual. "Nina called me today." Her head jerked up, her eyes widening just slightly. "Oh? What did she want?" "Just checking in, I guess," I replied, studying her reaction. It was an interesting conversation. Celia's fingers tightened around her phone. "What did she say?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. I wanted to scream, to accuse her right then and there, but something stopped me. I wasn't ready, not without more proof. I couldn't let her twist the narrative or deny it outright. So instead, I smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach my eyes. Nothing important. The tension in her shoulders relaxed, and she went back to her phone. But in that moment, I knew. Nina wasn't lying. Celia's reaction had confirmed everything. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, consumed by a single thought. I needed to know who it was. Was it someone I knew? A neighbor? A coworker? Or worse, someone close to our family? The idea that this person had been a ghost in my life, lurking in the shadows for 2 decades, made my stomach churn. The next morning, I made a decision. If Celia had been hiding this for 20 years, I was going to uncover every last detail. No more doubts. No more questions. It was time to get answers. The following days were a whirlwind of quiet determination. I realized that if I wanted the truth, I couldn't rely on Celia to hand it to me. She'd been living a double life for decades, so she clearly knew how to keep her secrets. If I confronted her without evidence, she'd deny everything, or worse, manipulate the situation to make me doubt myself. I started small. I went through her phone when she was in the shower one evening. My heart raced as I scrolled through her messages, but I found nothing incriminating. Her texts were mundane. exchanges with friends, reminders about errands, updates from work. It all seemed perfectly normal, but that only deepened my suspicion. If she was cheating, she'd know better than to leave a trail so obvious. Then I remembered her laptop. Celia wasn't tech-savvy. She barely knew how to clear her browser history, let alone hide her tracks on a computer. That night, after she fell asleep, I slipped into her home office. My hands trembled as I opened the laptop and typed in her password, a combination of our wedding anniversary and our daughter's birth year. She hadn't changed it in years. I started with her emails, scanning through her inbox and outbox for anything unusual. At first, it was just work messages and newsletters, the same benign content as her phone. But then I noticed a folder labeled Personal. My gut told me this was it. Inside were dozens of emails, dating back years, exchanged with someone named Michael. The messages were friendly at first, talks of shared interests, light jokes. But as I scrolled further, the tone shifted. They became more intimate, more emotional. And then, I found the smoking gun. I can't stop thinking about last weekend. The way you make me feel, it's like nothing I've ever known. I hate that we have to hide this, but I know it's the only way to keep what we have. The timestamp was from 3 months ago. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't just a distant memory, this was happening now. The emails painted a vivid picture of their relationship. Michael wasn't just some fling. He was a constant presence in her life, woven into the fabric of her routine. They had inside jokes, shared memories, even their own secret language. It was as if they were married, and I was the outsider. I leaned back in the chair, feeling like the wind had been knocked out of me. The betrayal wasn't just in the affair itself. It was in the effort she'd put into building this life with someone else while I was left in the dark. But there was still one question I couldn't answer. Who was Michael? The name Michael consumed me. Who was he? Was he someone I knew? Every face I encountered in our circle of friends, colleagues, and even acquaintances suddenly seemed suspicious. I imagined him lurking in the background of family gatherings, shaking my hand, perhaps even laughing at me behind my back. The thought made my stomach churn. I needed to find him. Celia had been meticulous, but not perfect. The emails hinted at rendezvous locations, a specific cafe downtown, a boutique hotel near the city's edge, even an art gallery opening from months ago. These places weren't random. They were deliberate. Michael wasn't some abstract figure anymore. He had a footprint, a pattern, and I was going to track it. I started with the cafe. One Saturday morning, I told Celia I was going to run errands and drove straight there. The place was charming, with rustic decor and oversized windows that let in the sunlight. It wasn't the kind of spot she'd normally frequent, but maybe that was the point. I ordered coffee and settled into a corner seat, keeping my eyes peeled for any sign of recognition. An hour passed, and nothing. My frustration mounted as I realized this wasn't going to be as simple as I'd hoped. I pulled out my phone and revisited the emails. They mentioned the cafe several times, always referring to a booth by the window. I glanced over to the spot, wondering if they'd sat there together, laughing and whispering while I was at home trusting her. The image stung, and I clenched my fists to steady myself. The boutique hotel was my next stop. This time, I took a bolder approach. Posing as a guest interested in booking a room, I asked the front desk manager about their policies on privacy. "Do you keep records of past visitors?" I asked, feigning curiosity. The manager hesitated. "We do, but only for a limited time. Is there something specific you're looking for?" I smiled, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. "Not at all. Just curious." As I left the hotel, I felt foolish. What was I doing, chasing shadows? But something deep inside pushed me forward. A need to understand the full scope of her betrayal. My breakthrough came unexpectedly. While combing through her emails again late one night, I noticed a detail I'd overlooked, an attachment. It was an RSVP confirmation for a charity event we'd attended together months ago. Except this one wasn't for us. It was for her and Michael. My mind raced. I recalled the event vividly, a black tie gala where Celia had seemed unusually distant. She'd spent much of the evening mingling, leaving me to make small talk with strangers. I chalked it up to her work-driven nature. Now, I realized she'd been meeting him. But that wasn't all. The RSVP listed Michael's full name, Michael Harris. Armed with this, I searched online. Within minutes, his face stared back at me. A polished LinkedIn profile of a man who wasn't just some stranger. He was Celia's former coworker, someone she'd worked with for years before switching jobs. Someone I'd met briefly at office parties. I stared at his smiling photo, my chest tightening. He wasn't faceless anymore. He wasn't some abstract idea. He was real, and he'd been in my life all along. The pieces were falling into place, and the betrayal cut deeper with every discovery. Now that I knew who he was, it was time to decide what to do about it. Michael Harris. The name and face haunted me, an unwelcome specter looming over my every thought. As much as I wanted to storm into his life and demand answers, I knew I had to be strategic. Bursting in without a plan would give Celia and Michael the upper hand, and I wasn't about to let that happen. For 20 years, they'd controlled the narrative. Now, it was my turn. I decided to observe him first. His LinkedIn profile provided enough details for me to figure out his routine. He worked at an architecture firm downtown, a sleek, modern office building with mirrored windows that reflected the bustling streets. On a brisk Wednesday morning, I parked nearby and waited. My heart pounded as I watched people stream in and out, searching for a familiar face. An hour later, I spotted him. Michael was tall, with salt and pepper hair and an air of effortless confidence. He wore a tailored suit and carried a leather briefcase, the picture of professionalism. It sickened me to think that this man, who looked so ordinary and respectable, had been an unseen shadow in my marriage for 2 decades. He stopped at a food truck, chatting with the vendor like they were old friends. I studied him carefully, noting every detail, the way he laughed, the way he checked his phone obsessively. Was Celia texting him right now? Were they planning their next secret meeting? The thought made my fists clench around the steering wheel. I followed him discreetly throughout the day. He had lunch at a quiet bistro, attended a meeting at a nearby hotel, and eventually returned to his office. It was mundane, almost boring, and yet it enraged me. This man had inserted himself into my life, into my family, and acted like it was his right. That evening, I confronted Celia for the first time. She was in the kitchen when I got home, humming softly as she prepared dinner. The scene was so domestic, so normal, that it nearly shattered me. How could she stand there, acting like the loving wife, when I knew the truth? I stood in the doorway, watching her, my emotions boiling to the surface. "Who's Michael Harris?" I asked, my voice low but firm. She froze, her back to me, the knife in her hand hovering over the cutting board. Slowly, she turned, her face carefully neutral. "What are you talking about?" "You know exactly what I'm talking about," I said, stepping closer. "I've seen the emails, Celia. I know about him." Her face paled, and for a moment, I thought she might deny it. But then, to my surprise, she sighed and set the knife down. "I was going to tell you," she said softly. "I just didn't know how." I laughed bitterly. "For 20 years? You didn't know how for 20 years?" Tears filled her eyes, but they didn't move me. "Not this time." "It's complicated," she began. "No," I snapped. "It's simple. You betrayed me. You betrayed our family. And now, you're going to tell me everything." She hesitated, but the weight of her guilt was written all over her face. She knew there was no escaping this, and I wasn't going to stop until I had every last truth. Celia sank into a chair at the kitchen table, her face a mask of shame and fear. For a moment, she didn't speak, just stared down at her hands. I stood across from her, my arms crossed, my heart pounding with anticipation. Every second of her silence felt like another betrayal, as if she were calculating how much of the truth to reveal. "Start talking," I demanded, my voice sharp. "How did this happen? How long has it been going on? And don't you dare lie to me." She inhaled deeply, as if gathering courage. "It started when we were struggling," she said hesitantly. "When the kids were young, and we barely had time for each other. You were working so much, and I felt alone." I flinched at her words. Was this how she justified 2 decades of deceit? "So you decided to find someone else?" I snapped. "Instead of talking to me, you turned to him?" "It wasn't like that," she said quickly, her eyes darting up to meet mine. Michael and I were friends first. He was there for me during a difficult time. I didn't mean for it to happen. That's a pathetic excuse, I said coldly. You don't accidentally carry on an affair for 20 years. Her tears began to fall, but they only stoked the fire of my anger. I didn't plan this, she said, her voice cracking. At first, it was just emotional. I needed someone to talk to, and you were so distant. He understood me in a way you didn't. I slammed my hand on the table, making her jump. Don't you dare blame this on me. I was working my ass off to provide for this family. Everything I did was for you and the kids, and you repay me by sneaking around with him? Celia sobbed into her hands, but I wasn't letting her off the hook. Tell me the rest, I demanded. How often did you see him? Did you ever consider ending it? She hesitated, her fingers trembling as she wiped her tears. We tried to stop a few times, she admitted, but we kept finding our way back to each other. It was like an addiction. I didn't want to hurt you, but I couldn't let him go. Her words were like daggers, each one slicing deeper into my soul. And what about me? I asked, my voice breaking. Did you ever think about what this would do to me? To our kids? I did, she whispered. I hated myself for it, but I thought, as long as you didn't know, I could keep everything together. I never wanted to lose you. I let out a bitter laugh. Well, congratulations. You managed to keep your secret for 20 years. But now I know. And you've lost me anyway. She reached out to touch my hand, but I pulled away. Don't, I said harshly. You don't get to comfort me. Not after this. The room fell silent, the weight of her betrayal hanging heavy in the air. The woman I thought I knew, the life I thought we had. It was all a lie. And now, I had to decide what to do with the truth. The weight of Celia's confession settled over the house like a thick, suffocating fog. Every room felt colder, smaller, as though the walls themselves were pressing in on me. I left her sitting at the kitchen table, her sobs muffled as I retreated to the sanctuary of our bedroom, the very room where I'd once felt safe and loved. Now, it was just another place stained by her lies. I closed the door and leaned against it, trying to catch my breath. The truth wasn't just a wound. It was an open, festering chasm. 20 years. I couldn't shake the number from my head. 2 decades of my life spent with someone who had been lying to my face, creating memories with another man while pretending to build a life with me. It was incomprehensible. I paced the room, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, sadness, confusion. Every glance around the room reminded me of what was at stake. Family photos lined the walls, each one a snapshot of what I thought was a happy life. Smiling faces, vacations, birthdays, our wedding day. The facade was perfect, but now I wondered how much of it had been real. The knock on the door jolted me from my thoughts. Can we talk? Celia's voice was soft, trembling, as though she feared my answer. I don't want to hear anything else right now, I called back, my voice cold and unyielding. Please, she pleaded. We have to talk about what happens next. Her words sent a fresh wave of anger coursing through me. What happens next? She was still trying to steer the narrative, to salvage something from the wreckage she'd created. I yanked the door open, and she stood there, her face pale and streaked with tears. What happens next? I repeated, my voice rising. You think we can just sit down and plan this out like a business meeting? You've destroyed everything, Celia. Everything. She flinched but didn't back away. I know I've hurt you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But we have to think about the kids. They're going to notice something's wrong. The kids. Of course. They were the only reason I hadn't walked out the door already. I loved them more than anything, and the thought of them being caught in the crossfire of this mess tore me apart. They deserved stability, security, not the fallout of their mother's betrayal. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to calm the storm raging inside me. I don't know what to do, Celia, I admitted, my voice breaking. I don't know how to fix this, or if it can even be fixed. We can try, she said desperately. Couples therapy, whatever it takes. Please, don't give up on us. Her words rang hollow. I didn't trust her anymore. How could I? You gave up on us the moment you let him into your life, I said. Therapy can't erase 20 years of lies. Celia stepped closer, her eyes filled with regret. I'll do anything to make it right. But as I looked at her, all I saw was the face of a stranger. Anything wasn't enough anymore. The damage had already been done, and I wasn't sure there was a way to undo it. As the days passed, the tension in the house grew unbearable. I couldn't look at Celia without feeling the weight of her betrayal, and every interaction was laced with resentment. The kids noticed something was off, of course. Their questions, innocent and probing, cut deeper than any argument we could have had. "Is everything okay, Dad?" my daughter asked one evening, her wide eyes filled with concern. "It's fine, sweetheart," I lied, forcing a smile I didn't feel. "Just grown-up stuff." Lying to them made me feel sick, but how could I explain the truth? That their mother had been leading a double life for longer than they'd been alive? That their father had no idea how to move forward? The thought was unbearable, so I pushed it aside and focused on what I could control. Celia continued her apologies, her promises to make things right. "We can fix this," she said one evening as I stood by the window, staring out at the streetlights. "We've been through so much together. Don't throw it all away." "You threw it away," I shot back, not bothering to turn around. "You and Michael. For 20 years, you made a fool of me. Do you even understand what that means?" Her silence was answer enough. But I wasn't just angry anymore. I was determined. Celia had stolen 2 decades of my life, and Michael had been complicit in it all. They hadn't just betrayed me, they disrespected everything I stood for. And I wasn't going to let them walk away unscathed. I began to formulate a plan. It started small, gathering more evidence. I went through the emails again, printing out every incriminating message. I scrolled through social media accounts, searching for photos, comments, or anything that could paint the full picture of their affair. I even contacted a private investigator to dig deeper into Michael's life. If he wanted to insert himself into mine, I was going to drag every skeleton out of his closet. The investigator worked quickly. Within days, I had a file thick with information. Michael's financial troubles, professional missteps, even whispers of other affairs. The man wasn't just a homewrecker. He was a fraud, a parasite. It made sense now why he'd clung to Celia. She wasn't just his lover. She was his safety net. I bided my time, playing the role of the wounded husband while quietly setting the stage. Celia thought I was considering her pleas for reconciliation, but in reality, I was preparing for war. I scheduled a meeting with my lawyer to discuss divorce proceedings, ensuring I would have the upper hand. The kids would stay with me. The house would be mine. And Celia? She would walk away with nothing more than the guilt of her actions. But that wasn't enough. Michael needed to pay, too. I wasn't going to let him escape the consequences of what he'd done. My plan was in motion, and the reckoning was coming. They thought they'd gotten away with it. They were wrong. With every detail of the plan falling into place, I felt a clarity I hadn't experienced in weeks. The chaos of discovery, the emotional storm. It was all fading, replaced by a cold, focused determination. Celia and Michael thought they could get away with what they'd done. I would prove them wrong, in a way they'd never forget. The first step was orchestrating a confrontation, one they wouldn't see coming. Celia still believed I was teetering on the edge of forgiveness, entertaining the idea of therapy and reconciliation. I let her think that. Her guilt made her pliable, willing to do whatever I asked to make things right. That was the leverage I needed. One evening, I approached her in the living room. "I've been thinking," I began, keeping my tone measured. "If we're going to move forward, we need to put everything on the table. No more secrets. No more lies." She nodded eagerly, her eyes hopeful. "Of course. Whatever you need." "Good," I said, taking a calculated pause. "Then you'll meet with Michael. Together. With me." Her face froze, the color draining as if I'd struck her. "What? Why would you?" "Because I need closure," I interrupted, my voice firm. "I need to hear it from both of you. I need to see that you're serious about ending this." She hesitated, her gaze darting to the floor. "I don't think that's a good idea." "It's not up for debate," I said sharply. "If you want a chance at saving this marriage, you'll do it." She reluctantly agreed, and I arranged the meeting under the guise of reconciliation. But in truth, This wasn't about saving anything. It was about exposure. The meeting was set for Saturday afternoon at a quiet cafe. I chose a spot where we wouldn't attract attention but could still have witnesses if things escalated. I informed the private investigator, who ensured he would be nearby, recording everything. If Celia or Michael thought they could talk their way out of this, they were mistaken. The day arrived, and I walked into the cafe with a calm exterior, though inside, I was brimming with tension. Celia sat across from me, nervously fidgeting with her napkin. A few minutes later, Michael entered, his confident demeanor faltering when he saw me. He hadn't expected me to be there, and it showed. I didn't realize this was a group discussion, Michael said, forcing a tight smile as he sat down. It is now, I replied, my voice steady. We're going to talk about the past 20 years, everything. No more lies. No more half-truths. Michael glanced at Celia, his expression hardening. She looked away, unable to meet his gaze. The silence between them spoke volumes, but I wasn't about to let them control the narrative. Start talking, I said, leaning forward. How did this start? Why did it go on for so long? And why the hell did you think you could get away with it? Michael hesitated, but before he could speak, I dropped the bombshell. I already know everything. This is your chance to explain yourself before I destroy what's left of your lives. Their reactions were priceless. Shock, panic, and a dawning realization that their secret world was about to crumble. This was only the beginning. The cafe was silent except for the faint hum of conversations around us. Celia stared at me, her face pale, while Michael's expression hardened into a defensive mask. He leaned back in his chair, trying to project confidence, but his shifting gaze betrayed him. What do you want from us? Michael asked, his voice calm but tinged with unease. I smiled, a cold, calculated smile that even I didn't recognize. What I want is simple. The truth. Every ugly, shameful detail you've been hiding for 20 years. And after that, I want you both to face the consequences. Celia tried to interject, her voice trembling. Please, let's not make a scene. No. I cut her off, slamming my hand on the table. Heads turned, but I didn't care. You don't get to dictate the terms here. You made this mess, and now we're going to unpack it. Michael glanced at Celia, then back at me. Fine, he said with a shrug. You want the truth? It was never about you. Celia and I, we found something you couldn't give her. His words were like gasoline on an open flame. Don't flatter yourself, I snapped. You didn't find anything. You're a leech, feeding off what wasn't yours to take. He smirked, but the tension in his jaw betrayed his bravado. You think you're the victim here, but maybe you should ask why she came to me in the first place. Celia buried her face in her hands, her muffled sobs grating against my nerves. Stop, she cried. Just stop. But I wasn't stopping. Not until I had ripped apart every delusion they had about their supposed love affair. I have everything I need, I said, pulling out a folder and dropping it on the table. Inside were the emails, financial records, and photographs the private investigator had gathered. Michael's face paled as he flipped through them, and Celia looked like she might collapse. Consider this your first warning, I said, my voice icy. Michael, your wife will be getting a copy of this soon. And Celia? The divorce papers will be on your desk by Monday. Celia gasped. You don't mean that. Oh, I do, I replied. This marriage ended the moment you chose him over me. Michael leaned forward, his tone dark. You think you're so clever, but this will hurt you too. Your kids, your reputation, everything will fall apart. I met his gaze, unflinching. The difference is, I'll rebuild. You, on the other hand, will be left with nothing. The fallout began almost immediately. I filed for divorce, citing infidelity, and ensured the evidence I'd collected would give me the upper hand in the settlement. Celia's pleas for forgiveness rang hollow as I packed my belongings and moved out of the house, leaving her to explain everything to our children. As for Michael, the private investigator's dossier was delivered to his wife. The confrontation that followed was even more explosive than mine. Rumors of his financial misconduct and other affairs spread through his professional circle like wildfire. Within weeks, he was fired from his job and left to fend for himself. Celia tried to salvage what little remained of her reputation, but her friends and family quickly distanced themselves. The story of her affair became the talk of the town, a sordid scandal that left her isolated and humiliated. Despite the chaos, I found unexpected clarity. My children were my anchor, their love and resilience reminding me of what truly mattered. I threw myself into rebuilding my life, focusing on my career, my health, and my relationships with them. Celia, on the other hand, struggled. She attempted to reach out, leaving tearful voicemails and sending long, apologetic emails, but I didn't respond. I'd given her everything for 20 years, and she'd thrown it away. There was no going back. Months later, I discovered that Michael and Celia had tried to rekindle their affair, but their relationship couldn't withstand the pressure of public scrutiny. Michael moved out of town, leaving Celia alone to face the wreckage. It should have brought me satisfaction, but all I felt was a hollow sense of justice. Still, there was one more thing I needed to do. I reached out to Michael's former employer with the evidence of his misdeeds, ensuring he wouldn't easily find work in his field again. It wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was about ensuring he didn't get a chance to ruin someone else's life. The divorce was finalized, granting me full custody of the children and the majority of our assets. Celia was left with little more than her memories and regret. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. The weight of her betrayal no longer consumed me. I had survived, and I was stronger for it. Life after Celia wasn't easy, but it was mine. I focused on being the best father I could be, rediscovering passions I'd long neglected, and slowly opening myself to the idea of trusting again. The scars of her betrayal would always remain, but they no longer defined me. In the end, I realized that Celia and Michael hadn't destroyed me, they'd freed me. And with that freedom, I built a life that was honest, fulfilling, and entirely my own.